Hello, everybody. Firstly, thank you to SparkFest for having us. To position who we are here today, we're all part of Antler. Antler is the world's largest early stage investment platform, and we enable experienced and aspiring entrepreneurs to build businesses. My name's Adele. I was part of the team that launched Antler into Australia, and I head up founder recruiting for our operations here in Sydney. So at Antler, we're really maximising founders' opportunity to succeed in building a business. This is from financial support from day one, building relationships as a long-term strategic investors, and leveraging our global platform to enable their businesses to then scale. Since our launch here in Sydney, we've run 3 cohorts and have created and invested in 41 companies. And personally, I'm delighted to say that that includes 43 female founders. And then joining me this afternoon, we have a number of these founders. They are all women from our current cohort who have chosen 2020 as the year to build a business. They all come from diverse career paths, covering entrepreneurship, management consulting, non-linear career paths, motherhood, and VC. So today we're going to talk to them about their careers to date and why they chose 2020 as a year to start their own businesses. So first up, I'd love to start with you, Shuri. You come from a really strong academic and sporting background and then went into management consulting with BCG, but then relatively quickly made the move into an education tech startup prior to joining Antler. I'd love to start with after just 2 years at BCG and then transitioning into startups, like how has that journey felt for you?
Yeah, so it's been a really journey so far. I think one that I didn't initially think I would start this early in my career in terms of founding a company, going down the path of entrepreneurship. I'd always been interested in entrepreneurship ever since my third year at university when I took an entrepreneurship class on a whim, loved it. And since then, eventually at some point going into entrepreneurship was what I was envisioning. And immediately after college, speaking to a lot of mentors and advisors, a lot of the advice I received was that management consulting would be a great starting foundation to then launch into whatever other career other people may want to go after, including entrepreneurship. So I did that for 2 years and was looking at various options. This opportunity with the edtech company came up, and I thought that was a great way to get into entrepreneurship, but without launching immediately into starting something myself, but getting my feet wet and getting that experience under my belt.
Cool, thanks, Shuri. A lot of people, especially with your strong academic background, like do go into management consulting to get that toolkit as it's described. Can you pinpoint a few elements of that which really you believe have set you up for starting a business?
Yes, I think 2 things in particular. One is the ability to really do deep research and empathize with a different person's perspective. So I think in the consulting world, this is understanding the client perspective. We work very closely with our client counterparts, understanding their pain points, their processes, etc. And I think a lot of those skills are very transferable then into the entrepreneurship skill set, where we are constantly meeting with different customers, understanding their customer journey and experience and their pain points. And I think the second thing is really being able to break down a problem into its various components and then have a structured way of thinking to be able to tackle each of those different pieces, break it down into some digestible parts, and then tackle those one at a time in a very systematic way. But I think in the startup world, it does require a little bit more flexibility because it's a bit more touch and go and less structured.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, actually, Shuri, because in one way that really sets you up for startups, but conversely, going from like a very hierarchical, like process-led environment into forming your own company, especially in the early days, is very different from that. So how have you then felt with operating like outside of that hierarchical process-driven structure?
Yeah, I think it's been extremely fun. I'll be a little bit overwhelming sometimes, but it is this very nebulous environment to be in. And there's just always just so many hats to wear and so many things to get done. But I think that's part of the excitement of entrepreneurship is that it is no one sort of cookie cutter or structured way to do things.
Mm-hmm.
It's more, I think, testing the muscles of creativity and that hustle and the drive to be able to take into sort of your hands all of these things that need to be done. And at the end of the day, knowing that what you are working on ultimately comes back to you because it's your company. So I think that's the most exciting part, and definitely something to adjust to, coming from a very structured and hierarchical world of consulting.
And I think just finally, like a lot of people don't know when they're ready to start a company and to go for it. And that doesn't necessarily correlate to age. Like, what gave you the confidence after the 2 years at BCG, 1 year in an ed tech to go for it yourself?
Yeah, I think part of it is I don't think anyone ever really quite feels ready to dive into entrepreneurship and start a company. I think it is a very overwhelming idea. But seeing so many people I admired or who I got to know sort of in this startup space do it themselves, and hearing their advice of you're never going to feel ready, so just go for it. And you do just learn and absorb a lot of it along the way. And especially when I found out about the Antler opportunity, being able to do that with a whole community of other founders, many other people sort of going through it either for the first time or just as feeling either lost or uncertain. I think that also gave me a lot of comfort knowing that I would have a community to do it with, not just on my own the whole way through.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a really lonely road, especially for solo co-founders. And it's definitely, I think, a big asset of Antler to be able to bring people together, to have that community and shared experience and support of building a business. Amazing. Thanks, Shuri.
Really.
I'd now love, Jess, to jump to you, because you've come to building a business from a very different background. You've had what we would describe as like a non-linear career path. Can you please share some of the key milestones in this journey and how they have actually prepared you for now building a VC-backed company for yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Adele. Yeah, so I think it's fair to say that I have come from quite a sort of non-linear career path. I started out my career in media and worked as a journalist before I spent some years in public affairs with a large international human rights organisation, Amnesty International. And each of those experiences really gave me a range of different skill sets that I probably didn't quite understand at the time. When I lived in Hong Kong, after I left Amnesty, I really felt like I had an entrepreneur just kind of bursting out of me. It was more like entrepreneurship chose me than the other way around, because I just was itching to produce something. And I had always had a long-held vision of taking a product from concept through the production phase and to market to see if I could sell it. And I started an apparel business when I was living in Hong Kong. And in the process of doing that, I really started to realize that all these seemingly disparate parts of my career that I had always kind of wondered how they hung together had all facilitated within me the ability to be able to jump into any problem and solve it. And even going back as far as my days at uni when I was waitressing, the hospitality years really taught me a deep empathy for the customer, the importance of teamwork. My years in events taught me about the importance of process and strong basis in logistics and operations. So I really started to realize at that time that I was tapping into this very diverse skill set that I had accumulated working in a range of different jobs with a really diverse range of people, which I think was one of the most powerful things. I have been exposed to a real array of different types of people and organizations in my career. And that I have found over time has served me incredibly, incredibly well.
Thanks, Jess. And perhaps there are people listening who can really relate to that. And have you got any tips for them on how they can find like validation of their skills beyond what often is provided in a job title? So how to have like confidence, which they perhaps haven't been able to get through promotions. And then also how to communicate your skills when it's not defined necessarily by a job title.
Yeah, I think for me, that's definitely something that I struggle with at certain points, sort of comparing myself to peers who had taken a more kind of linear path and wondering, as I said before, what does this actually qualify me for? And one of the things that I did was I spent a lot of time thinking about the things that I was good at that were not related to a particular job or a particular job title, thinking about the things that I had learned and really trying to understand which of those skills were transferable. And when I actually took the time to step back and kind of map it out, all of those things that I mentioned before, the ability to relate to a bunch of, all different sorts of people, strong foundation in logistics and operations, ability to be able to write and tell stories, all of these things are incredibly powerful skill sets. I think also for me, something that it took me quite a long time to be comfortable with was to learn how to openly talk about my experiences without feeling like I was trying to sort of sell myself. And I have really found that by being increasingly kind of authentic about the way I communicate my experiences, and that includes my failures as well as my successes, I really feel like that has enabled me to connect with people on a different level, even if it's really hard to communicate that, in paper on a CV, for example.
It's interesting because you and Shuri coming from very different backgrounds have like hit on a couple of key points, which is around like empathy and problem solving. Thanks, Jess. And then to Margot, like your background, I think more closely relates to Shuri's, having been in management consulting and then a founding team member of two rocket internet companies, and now co-founding your own. I suppose, can you give us a few like indicators of along that journey, like what's really given you the confidence and given you the abilities to then co-found for yourself?
Sure. I mean, for me, my personality has always been around one where I've taken a lot of ownership for whatever I've worked on. And so, like literally, if I was working on a project for a big company, I would take it fully on myself to make sure that the company delivered whatever it was that I was working on, and that it was my responsibility to get everything lined up to make that happen. So that's kind of very much part of my DNA, and my drive is to take that level of ownership. And I guess when I've been in corporate roles or those types of roles, the thing that has kind of alienated me from them is just this need for speed and this need to push really hard and the need to see results, and not being comfortable with not seeing those things kind of follow through and not being able to control them. And so doing something of my own kind of makes a lot of sense in that context.
Thanks, Margot. And given your solid experience in, I suppose, startups and also in VC, have you felt that there have been any key differences from building a business in 2020 versus like prior when you were part of the team that launched Iconic, given what's happening globally at the moment?
I mean, when we launched the Iconic, there was a lot of us in a very small space, so that that was a fundamental difference. I think, like fundamentally, the kind of what changes the environment when you're doing a startup business is a combination of who's around you, how much capital you have, and I guess to me that it doesn't feel massively different. This time, I have a really fantastic co-founder next to me, and so. That's been a blessing that I found through Antler, and I'm super grateful for that.
Oh, great to hear. Thanks, Margot. And then, given your experience, I can imagine a couple of people are thinking, "Wow, she was part of the team that launched the Iconic. Why did you feel the need to go through Antler versus just building a business by yourself?"
Yeah, sure. I think Antler has kind of three. For me, it has three propositions. It's like the providing the initial capital and the network of investors and access to that. There's the curriculum and coaching, and then finally, there's kind of finding the co-founder or your co-founders for your team. For me, my emphasis was very much around finding a co-founder. I really realized that I just didn't want to do this business by myself. And the fact that Antler and you, especially Adele, spend so much time finding such high quality people, it was really the quality of that cohort and the opportunity to to find someone in a really accelerated way who'd already stepped up and said, I'm wanting to step away from my job and a startup, that was what was super appealing to me.
Cool. And for everybody who's curious perhaps about some of these businesses, I'll let you know about Margot's, because I definitely will be a customer. She's on a mission to bring better bras to women. So thank you for doing that, Margot. I'm sure many of us will be thankful in years to come for your product. Can you share what it's like trying to transform an industry where even when the product is for women, it's actually still mostly operated by men, and your experience of that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's like obviously humorous things that happen, and then there's great things that happen and frustrating things that happen as part of that. And I guess as an entrepreneur, you have to wear many hats, and you have to wear a hat which is like a hardline numbers kind of hat. You have to wear this customer obsessed hat and product obsessed hat. And I guess when you're kind of pitching to for me, when I'm pitching to men, the difference between that versus maybe talking to a fellow woman is that I need to prove that the problem is real. Whereas, 4 out of 5 women will say, I freaking hate bras, and you don't need to sell me on that. So that's the main thing is the fact that I need to kind of re-articulate the problem and just be more focused around the numbers and the size of the opportunity. But I have had far too many men who think that lingerie is a niche product when clearly we all wear it every day, and it's quite a scale thing for 50% of the.
Exactly. Thank you, Margot. And then to you, Lisa, you also spent a number of years with McKinsey, another top management consulting company, prior to joining Antler. And what I really love about what you're doing with us is that you came with such a clear mission to build a product that's centered around your passion. I'd love to hear your tips for anybody who feels like they've identified a business which is a passion area, and how you then do form a company around that.
Yeah. Thanks, Adela. I think so. I quit my job earlier because I felt like a passion. I wanted to do something more, just help other companies grow bigger than they already are. But earlier in the start of this year, without actually any kind of concrete plans of what is next, the plan was always kind of maybe do it as a side project, and figure out, validate the problem before I launched into doing something myself full time. But then coronavirus hit, and that kind of just changed things a bit. But just kind of pushing upon kind of the passion, the problem that we're solving is about female financial literacy and how to empower them to start investing and creating more wealth for themselves. So kind of back to your question, if a woman or anyone sees an opportunity or a gap in the market, which I've spent the past years in financial, it's been on the top of my head that really a gap that's currently underserving women. I guess my first tip would be just to really I'm trying to validate the problem. Since I started doing Antler, so many people will come up to me and say, hey, I have this brilliant idea. It's going to be the next billion-dollar business. And then I said, okay, cool. So how many people have you talked to? Have you actually validated it? They're like, oh, yeah, I've talked to some friends and everyone loves it. Of course, because everyone's your friend and they're going to say things. So I guess my first tip would be, talk to a lot of people, potential users, and see if it actually is a problem. And then the tip number 2 would be to talk to a lot of people who in your shoes before, who've tried to solve this problem. They've either succeeded or they've failed, and just to learn from their experience. And the third tip would be just don't be afraid to ask for help. I think a lot of people like myself who come from the corporate world were always a bit overachievers. We're scared to ask for help. But I think in the startup world, which I find really fascinating, is everyone is always so happy and so willing to commit their time experience because everyone's been in your shoes and they know how hard it is. So really leverage kind of the goodwill of people around you to get more mentoring and coaching.
Yeah, Lisa, I think you touched on nearly 50% of the interviews that I have because so much of my job is hearing people's ideas. And I'm like, great, that sounds really interesting. What have you done about it? And they're like, oh, well, yeah, maybe I should do that. And yeah, take it outside of family and friends, like put up a landing page to actually start testing like external people's interactions with it, or like put up some Facebook ads. Or like now there's some really easy hacky ways of being able to gauge that beyond families and friends. Thank you. Just a note, Lisa, your internet was pretty patchy in there, so your audio did drop out or not. I'm not sure if you could connect maybe to another internet while we just hop to Iris. Is that okay? Iris, thank you for waiting. And prior to Antler, like you were a commercial business leader in a global recruiting company. And really, I find this fascinating, especially as a mother myself. You actually came straight from your maternity leave into Antler to found a VC-backed business. Personally, after having my girls, I found it a bit daunting just going back to my old job 3 days a week. So I'd love to hear your thought processes behind that, and really what gave you the conviction to go for it.
Yeah, thanks, Adele. Well, I've been asked that question many, many times, and I sometimes wonder if my male counterparts are getting the same question when they start a program like this just after having a second baby. But irrespectively of that, I think the thought process with both my maternity leaves, when you go on leave, it's actually a beautiful period where you kind of have time to think, and I think it doesn't happen that often during your career. Of course, you're busy with a lot of other things, but I could speak for myself that I absolutely had some time to think and reflect. And I think that reflection really made me kind of think about the future and what I would see myself doing in the future. And I think more than ever, I felt really strongly that I wanted to use my talent and my capability for something that feels really meaningful and purposeful. Because if I'm not with the kids, now I better spend it on something that I feel really passionate and proud of, that I can actually make them feel proud about in the future as well. So I think that was really kind of the hard side of it, of not even thinking about the logistics, because I absolutely acknowledge that there are that it's not an easy ride, let's say. But I think that was one of the main things, and I just know that I'm such a way more great mum for them when I do something with my brain as well as caring for them, and if I find the right balance between the two, things will work itself out. So I think that was part of the thought process. And then we were really lucky with my partner being able to actually take off a few months of parental leave when I started the accelerator. And that gave me kind of that kickoff in the beginning to really focus and not be distracted as much as I would have been. So that has been a natural kind of easier to then in the end decide and go for it, I guess.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I think your comment that most resonated with me there was like, if I'm not going to be then with my children, there's like now a larger opportunity cost. So it needs to be having an impact. Like my reason for coming to work like needs to be bigger than just like something to do, making some money. Like there's a real reason. I need to have a real reason to be able to not get the pleasure of being at home. Or sometimes actually it was nice to escape, to be quite honest with you, as parents we all really try to. And get dressed up. And then I think, ladies, what I'd love to now like kind of open this up a bit. And we are increasingly told that women have a lower risk profile than men do. And yet the five of you have chosen 2020 as the year to launch a business. And that's coming from either like high paying roles or from like motherhood. So like big transitional changes. I'd love to hear if any of you have had some, I suppose, thinking around why 2020 was the year to launch a business. Like a lot of what we've talked about as Antler is there's a huge opportunity with changing user behaviors. And historically, if you look back to 2008, 2009, it was actually when many of the companies that are now household names were funded and invested in, such as Square, Uber, Airbnb. Did any of that kind of like come into your decision making, or was it kind of irrelevant what was happening in the global scene? Like this was the year you were building a business?
I think I'm happy to respond to that. I think it's a combination of both for us at least, but we're building a business related to the future of work. And I think a lot of kind of things that were always not possible when it comes to work and how we work, I think are now all of a sudden accelerated. So I believe there is definitely an opportunity. And by jumping onto this journey right now, I guess a lot of people are still working through crisis, and the beauty of starting your own is you have all the time to spend all your talent and resources on thinking about the future, and I feel that that's a great opportunity to do it now.
Thank you. Did anybody else make a more, I suppose that was quite a calculated decision in some ways around like changing user behavior. Does anybody else have any inputs on why 2020?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was also the time is now for the product, where I felt like there's a big push for comfort around COVID, and all of us are like, okay, we don't want to wear bras anymore. There's this push kind of around female empowerment, and there's also at the same time there's a bit of a revolution in e-commerce and kind of a real personalization within e-commerce. And so for me, it was like, oh, I just feel like this. Someone has to do this. Someone has to make this product better for women. And if I don't do it now, then maybe someone else will in that time. So for me, it felt like, okay, this is the time to really, really run at this thing. And I guess the way that I deal with the risk around that, and the way that I have always thought about startups in terms of framing it to make myself comfortable, is really like, what's my worst case scenario? And I think there's this myth that people who are founders don't have risk aversion, and when they've kind of studied it, they find that actually it is that a lot of the time people do have backup plans, and they've really thought through like what actually is my worst case of what's going to happen now. And so if you are that type of personality, don't kind of feel put off by needing to think that through. And for me, it's like, well, the worst case scenario is that I need to go back and find the type of job that I was doing before. Am I comfortable that I could find something? Yeah, I think I could find something in the time frame before things got really bad. And so for me, I felt that that's how I kind of become comfortable with taking the risk personally, and it had to be now from a business perspective.
Thanks, Margot. Excellent. And then I think just kind of like following on the female trend of the conversation, then what I love is actually Shuri and Jess, you're in co-founding teams of 3, and you are the other 2 co-founders are male. And I think quite interestingly for some, perhaps, that you're also both the CEO. Can you talk about I suppose how that decision making came about, and if there's any other insights that maybe women can get here on like how to position themselves for the position that they deserve, because often we can downplay ourselves or like give up opportunities to others. So I'd love to hear, and you get to tell your stories of how you actually became the CEOs of your companies.
I'm happy to jump in there. For us, it was quite organic and based on a really honest conversation about the kind of capabilities and the needs within the team. The space that we're tackling is the remote team engagement space. We're building a product called Remote Social, which enables remote and hybrid teams to socialize. And I guess as a result of that, time is really of the essence. I have 2 very strong male co-founders, Mike, who is very strong on the product and technology side. He's very, very busy with building the actual product, and Gerardo, who's on the marketing side, who is obviously very strong on marketing, and he's very focused on our user acquisition. So there's a big piece there in terms of the fundraising, the relationship building and management, and operations and people management that I'm naturally suited to. So it was an easy decision for us as a team in terms of really being able to make sure that we set ourselves up to run as hard as possible at the opportunity, because really time is of the essence with the type of product that we're building. I do also think that at this early stage of a startup, I guess titles are important in some ways in terms of kind of positioning ourselves externally, but we work very, very collaboratively, and all the kind of core strategic decisions we're quite collaborative, both in terms of the product, the fundraising, and the actual business strategy. So yeah, it's a privilege to work alongside them.
It sounds amazing to hear that it was simple as best person for the job in the simplest answer. Great. Sheree, how was your experience?
Yeah, I think my experience is also quite similar to Jess's and her team. So similarly, a very organic and honest discussion. And I think as well for us, the timing of the team coming together did play a part as well. So initially, amongst the founder group within Antler, Sam, who's our CTO, he and I sort of came together first to form a team. And then it was only a couple of days later that Scott, our COO, joined as well. But I think naturally the discussion did start when it was just me and Sam, as CEO, CTO is a natural split between our two roles. And then when Scott joined our team, we all had a conversation and sort of looked at the different scenarios of, does it make sense if I stay CEO, if Scott goes CEO? And like Jess mentioned, right now it is a lot of everyone just all hands on deck, and the roles are, again, for external purposes, I think helpful, but in terms of what we are working in and dividing and conquering as a team, it's a bit of everything. So naturally, Scott and I are tackling a lot of the non-tech things, but even here and there, we're sort of helping out as well. And our product is also very much the time is of the essence. So we're also building a very COVID-related product called Feather, which is an online platform that allows creators and instructors to deliver online, live and on-demand classes. So with that, I think it's more what was really important in our conversation was how can we discuss really openly as a team how we want to divide and conquer the work, and less so getting really drawn to specific titles or not.
Amazing, thank you. What I love is that you've all got businesses which 2020 and the disruption that's happening, it's giving you all an opportunity in all of your businesses to really get a bit more cut through. I'd love then on maybe to make this practical for anybody who is launching a business currently, are there any tips that you can give to really capitalize when you do see a massive opportunity in front of you and you know that you need to run fast to capture that?
I would just echo what Lisa said. I mean, I think it all starts with the validation. I think the more validation you can collate in the early stages, the faster ultimately that will allow you to collect the right insights to enable you to move faster. Once you've been able to collate some powerful insights, I think it's all about understanding how you're going to tackle that problem. And I think if you haven't done the work to really understand the problem that you're trying to solve, it's always going to be trying to paste over that. So I 100% echo what Lisa said about doing the user testing, making sure that you're speaking to as many customers and potential customers and people that are going to also give you the answers that you may not want to hear, because ultimately the more you take on board constructive feedback, the stronger your business will get. That doesn't mean you have to take on every piece of advice. Some pieces of advice you have to choose also to ignore, but there really is a big piece of work in terms of understanding your customers and the problem that you're trying to solve.
Thanks, Jess. Excellent. I suppose then, has anybody found, maybe perhaps Margot, has anybody found something quite unique about 2020 in launching a business, as you have done this a couple of times previously? Or it sounds like actually it's been quite inconsequential or actually just an opportunity for you all. But are there any tips that you can give on navigating 2020, which you perhaps haven't felt were apparent when you've done this previously?
I think it's just a really different, I really think the emotions in a startup and managing your energy levels is really critically important to being able to kind of work at the pace that you need to make. You need to be able to work at and make the decisions at the pace you need to make decisions at in a startup. And so I think in a kind of COVID environment, that becomes a really different thing. So rather than kind of going into the office and having lots of people or having all these kind of one-on-one coffee conversations, it becomes much more, how do you create that energy and keep your own personal vibes up between your co-founder team through that. And so for us, we're kind of like getting outside more and just accepting that in general, when we do kind of a Zoom call or whatever with people, we're unlikely to get quite as much of a buzz as we might in a face-to-face conversation.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've definitely found, personally, I've really enjoyed the switch to video in interviewing at the volume that we do. It's made it a lot more, I would say, precise in some ways and removed. It's like leveled the playing field, I feel, a bit for introverts and extroverts, and also for people you can't rely on like chemistry or interactions as much. You like really have to focus on what individuals are telling you, and so it removes a lot of the biases that can happen in person contact. So I think it's actually, in terms of interviewing in the format that we do, really been a benefit. Amazing. I'd love just then to have any of you got any tips that you'd really like to share with the audience that have really I suppose enabled you to succeed in this environment, because Antler is very much one way of starting a business, and I suppose teamed with doing it in a global pandemic, like we in 10 to 11 weeks need somebody to go from an individual with skills and idea to having a VC backable company, like something that we can invest in. Has anybody got any tips on what has really prepared them for this, or perhaps what they wish they could have had in preparation?
I think what's been helpful for me from the beginning. Oh, I'll keep going.
Then Helena? Yeah.
Sounds good. So I think what's been very helpful for me from the beginning is having had this community of other founders within Antler. And I think regardless of whether one looks at starting a company within an accelerator like Antler or otherwise, I think just having other people around, whether they are at the same stage or maybe a little bit ahead and have had the experience. But one of my favorite parts of the last couple of months has been just getting to know everyone in this cohort, and just all of these nuggets of wisdom and resources and support and help that comes out of these conversations, whether they are virtual Zoom chats or just like in the hallway here in the office. I think that's been incredibly helpful to have the support network. And I know, Margot, you had started a company before as a sole founder, and I couldn't imagine how difficult that must be. So that's been something that I've felt incredibly fortunate to have had in this community, and I think that can be found within a program or outside of it, but very important to have.
Thank you. Helena?
Iris? Thanks. Well, I think what Antler does really well, like with over 10 years in corporate landscape, you learn a lot, and I think there is a lot of that which is relevant to bring to the table. And I think the community of people they create, and by you making the decision to start the journey, I've been so surprised how many doors open, how many people come onto your journey and onto your path. And I think if you do that surrounded by 99 other people, all those 99 people know another number of people. So it's kind of a snowball effect of how many people you all of a sudden get surrounded with that can help you along the journey. So for me, that has been such a positive surprise along the journey.
Cool, thank you. Lisa, are we back with you on internet connection? Have you got, I suppose, any thoughts? Oh, Lisa, we can't hear you. We have no audio. Oh, that's a shame. Oh, I just got you there.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, I can, yes.
Okay. I think it was shut off by the control. But I'm back. Yeah, I just wanted to build on that. I was just thinking, I think the great thing about working in an environment like Antler is you get the coaching you get from, the network of advisors and coaches, whether it's the core Antler team or the kind of affiliated advisors, kind of what it takes to build a VC backable business. So I think everyone thinks their business can be $1 billion business, and it's there are certain criteria it takes to become a VC backable. So I think it's the process of getting that coaching and really testing your personal limits and to receive feedback and being able to pivot, because that's what it takes to build a successful business, right? Constantly pivoting, whether it's customer feedback or VC feedback or your partner's feedback. So I think that was a really good learning journey for myself. Like kind of everyone has already touched upon getting all of the tips and learnings from your peers, but for me it was kind of the whole coaching that we got from the advisors and within the Antler coaches as well that I've personally found very, very valuable.
Cool. And then I suppose to go a bit deeper into that, is anybody happy to share what they feel like is the best piece of advice that they've been given over the course of building a business with us? Like it can be quite practical, or it can be more on like the emotional side, or like what is it? Is there one piece that's really, really stuck with you? Like for me personally, it was my previous manager. The best piece of advice I had was that it's more important to be effective than it is to be right. And it was just something that I really took into Antler. I suppose, has anybody got any tips, like either from one of the Antler coaches or more from like how to build a business and survive still as a human or as a mother, that they'd be happy to share?
I don't know if this is like ridiculously contrived, but when I was the founder of a homewares business called Delaney, which we took to quite big, like $3.5 million run rate, and sold, and kind of at that point of sale, I was like, what's my biggest lesson from this? And I got it engraved on a piece of jewelry to like continually remind myself of it. And that was kind of in this startup context in particular, it was decide again. So it's like, it's what's worse than not making a decision is like what's worse than making a decision that's wrong is to not make a decision and just leave it there and be kind of churning on it for a really long time and lose all of that time. And it's much better to kind of quickly make a decision. If it's wrong, learn from it and then kind of rectify your mistake. And so for me, that's quite empowering. It's like, okay, I make a decision now, and if it turns out not to be, that's still okay. I can still manage that and work with that.
Cool. That's a good one. Do you still wear the piece of jewelry?
It needs repair, but otherwise I would.
I was setting you up to be like, here it is. Has anybody else got anything they can share?
I think that there's a common misconception that in the first year or 2 years of building a startup, you have to do sort of 365 all-nighters. And I think that the team at Antler were very kind of supportive and kind of made it clear that it's a marathon, not a sprint. So while there absolutely is an expectation that we all have to work incredibly hard, as you do in any early stage startup, it's really important to balance that alongside the other things that are going to kind of give you perspective. I know many of us on this call are mums of 1, 2, or 3 kids. For me, exercise is incredibly important. So making sure that I take the time in my calendar to do the things that are really going to keep me balanced. That's something that advice that I've been given at other times in my life, but it was also reiterated very strongly by Antler, which I think is a really, really important perspective. There have been so many other tidbits of advice and information, not just from the Antler coaches, but from the incredible network of advisors that we've been able to connect with, that it would be hard to kind of list them all on one page, but definitely just to kind of reiterate the importance of building up that community and how amazing it has been to have access to the caliber of people that we've been able to access, and how generous those people have been with opening their networks and their calendars kind of in turn. It's been really mind-blowing about how much further you can proceed in a short space of time, having access to that caliber of person to sort of support you along the way as you're building.
Great, thanks, Jess.
I think another point I would build on is also just I remember one of our first or second master classes was teaching us to be really obsessed with the problem and not the solution. And being very passionate about that problem as well, because that's when you can think of 1,000 ways to solve that problem and continue to iterate on it. And when you are obsessed with a problem, that's when you really hold, the customers at heart and trying to find the best solution for them. And that's also what kind of keeps you going when you're eating ramen for months. You're really passionate about solving a specific problem for your users and trying to change the world some way or another. So I think that was kind of a great lesson I learned early on, just to be really focused on the problem and not just trying to think of what the solution might be.
Thanks, Lisa. And then just in our final 5 minutes, for people here thinking like, wow, like maybe I should be thinking about building a business. Maybe there isn't a reason to be putting it off, or I really resonate with some of these stories here. I can do this. Have you got any I suppose suggestions on how people should either validate for themselves whether that is a good idea or not, or how people can get perhaps any reference points that they need to give them the conviction to go for it?
There will never be a perfect
I
time
think
to start.
I would build on what.
You go ahead, Iris.
Sorry, I think there's a bit of delay in my connection, but I was going to say, I'm just building on what Margot said before about not making a decision. I think asking yourself the question if you're not doing it because of anxiety or fear, or that you're actually like, what's the real reason of not doing it, and otherwise just giving it a go and let other people for you decide if it's the right timing, if you would do it through Antler. I think that's something I definitely would consider.
I was just going to say, I don't think that there's ever a perfect time to start a new business. And if you're waiting for all the ducks to sort of line up for everything to be ready, for you to be personally ready with the right skill set, for you to be financially ready to take a risk, for the market to be ready, for your given idea, like it's impossible for all of those things to line up to be perfect. So I think whether or not you're choosing to take the leap and do it full time, or you're doing it alongside your full-time job as a side hustle, there are a lot of ways that you can test business ideas that don't cost a lot of money. You alluded to some of them before, Adele. You could set up a Typeform, you could set up a no-code sort of landing page, you could do a survey, you could do Facebook ads. There are a huge range of ways that are not incredibly time or resource intensive to do that testing. And I think that there's some kind of low barrier sort of first steps that you can do to test it. And every single step that you make is another step and another kind of brick that you're putting into the wall of kind of getting started. So I think regardless of how small the first step is that you take, just take that first step and then work out what the next step is, what the next brick is, because ultimately I think that's what business building is. And I think that's what we're all still doing, where, we're in the early stages of building our next businesses, and we're putting kind of one piece on top of the other. And ultimately that's the way businesses get built. You don't wake up one day with a wildly successful business. You take a lot of steps, you make a lot of mistakes, you make a lot of wrong decisions, Margot, and then you make other decisions. So for me, it's just take the first step and work the rest out as you go.
I think now that's what the Antler team have got used to telling me. I have so many ideas, and everyone's always asking me where I'm joining the cohort. But then, I just don't do those simple steps that I know to do, which is probably means my day job's quite consuming, but also means that maybe I haven't got the conviction and I'm quite ready to go for it myself yet. Maybe cohort 8, I'll make an appearance. Amazing. Thanks, ladies. And then just in our final couple of minutes, like one thing that I just really want to celebrate here is that we are like 6 women who either work in VC or are building companies, and I just find that so powerful. So it's a pleasure to do this alongside you and hopefully inspire other women to do that, or parents or anybody that's really resonated with any elements of this session. I suppose leaving that then on a personal note, has anybody got any like tips of how they've balanced, either like motherhood or like sporting stuff, which could be taking up a lot of their time outside, like I suppose life demands that all of us have, with starting a business? Anybody got some good little hacks they can share?
For me, it's all about thinking about what your most productive time is at work and what your most important time is kind of outside of work, and really optimizing from that. Like, you have so much control over your schedule. So for me, mornings are super productive times for me. So I work every single morning of the week, and then I know that I have energy lows on a Wednesday afternoon and a Friday afternoon. So that's when I kind of take a little bit of time back to spend with my daughter. And I find I come back super energized from that and able to make better decisions and be in a better mind space.
Wow, Margaret, when you do this on a Wednesday afternoon. Thank you. Thank you for doing that.
You're very special, Adele.
Amazing. Thank you. We just have a final 30 seconds, so I'm not sure if we have enough time for anybody to have a quick answer, but if anybody would like to have a stab at it, please do.
I was going to add very quickly that I love combining things to be more efficient with my time. So when I go on runs, for example, I love listening to the How I Built This podcast. And it's just combining listening to startups and learning more while getting a run in the morning as well. 5 seconds.
Sounds like you're right to be building a productivity tool then as well, Sherry. So that goes together well. Excellent. Our timer is up, so thank you so much, ladies. That was really awesome. And thanks for everybody who is listening.